Hello, today we're going to be making hot water crust for some meat pies. Now, we've got two different sets of flour and ingredients here because we're going to be trying to do this with a gluten-free flour as well and see how that turns out. Now, the universal equation for our meat pies is for every 2 meat pies, we're going to use 125 grams of flour, 25 grams of lard, and a quarter cup water. Now I did say lard, so you will need this product. I haven't tried using anything else, but I feel like if you're making a meat pie, having a meat-based product is a-okay. So the first thing you want to do before you really get wrapped up in making your crust is to dust your tins, because the hot water crust is worked warm, and so you're on a timeline once you get this project started. Now it doesn't take a lot of time, but once you get going you want to kind of be efficient with time. So we're going to dust it out, make sure it's not too heavy on there but it coats all the edges. Now that is both a dusting and a covering with butter or fat. For the flour based ones that are going to have gluten, I did use butter. For these, which I'm using a Bob's Red Mill Gluten Free AP, I used coconut oil to oil these. Now what we're going to go ahead and do is step over to the stove, take 25 grams of lard and this quarter cup of water. We're going to combine them together and then mix them while still hot into this dough. So I'll see you in a second over by the stove. Alright, so we're over here at the stove, and what I did is I just put that quarter cup of water and that lard in the pan. I put it on the stove, let it get warm. I didn't want it to boil or get too out of control, but I did want a slight bubble on it so that there was definitely some heat going on here. But as soon as that bubble starts happening, I'm going to take this off the stove and I want to take it over to the flour and get it mixed there. I want you to see exactly how easy it is to then mix this in. I'm going to add into a well about half the liquid. I'm going to stir it all together with the spatula, and then I'm going to add the rest of the liquid. Make sure it all goes in. Here we go. Okay. I'm going to stir it all together. Now it's going to come together pretty quickly for us. There we go. Once it gets most of the dough hydrated, it's going to have cooled down enough that we can probably get our hands in there on it. So let's clear the sides, although if we work it, it'll kind of gather itself all up. I can definitely see it's pretty much ready to come together. So what I'm going to do is I want to flour this work surface right here. I've gone ahead and got a little bit of flour. I don't want to use too much. Now in this case I am choosing to work on wood as opposed to my regular countertop. You can do whichever you like and that you find gives you the best results. So then take the prepared dough, turn it all right side right there, scrape it all in. There we go. Get your hands in and then just work it just a little bit. Okay. Alright, just needs a little bit. You'll feel it's very warm to the touch. You have to work this dough warm. You have to put it into your tins warm. So that's just something you're going to need to put up with. If it feels too hot, just give it a quick second. But playing hot potato is going to be a bit more effective. If it feels like it's sticking to this at all, I talked about a bench scraper before. I highly recommend one. They're super useful. All right, so we have enough dough here, it's looking good, that we can make our tart tins. These are the ones I'm using just to do some mold. So I'll take my dough, divide it in half. I'm gonna take about 20% of it, maybe less, I don't know. You can call it the percentages, call me out on it. But we're gonna separate that because that's gonna be our lid. So get our dough, work it kind of around, get a rolling pin, and roll it out. Now we are trying to move a little quickly right now because everything is cooling down. It's going to become harder to work with as it cools down. Okay, I put a little bit of flour there on my rolling pin. I just don't want this to get stuck to that or curl over. I've had that happen way too many times with the pie crust. I'm sure you have too. So we'll just keep it nice and happy there. All right, so we're gonna roll it out to a uniform thickness. This is gonna be about, looks to be about a 1/4 inch there. Looks to be about big enough. A little more that way. There we go. All right. So we're going to take our pie crust like this. I find because we really don't want it to sit sticking, I'm going to go ahead and flour that side. Flick it over. I'm going to flour that side. Not a bunch of excess, but just enough that it's going to really start kind of drying it out right now. I'm going to drop it into our tin right here like this. And as I'm working it in, if you've got some fingernails that are a little too long, or you just don't feel really confident in being able to get it into the edge, what you can do is take a little, ooh, that one's dirty. Let's use a clean one. Here we go. Take a little bit of this pastry dough, make it into a ball, and you can use that ball to then press your pie into the corners if you don't want to use your hands there. But ultimately, you do want to give it a good feel and see where it's at with your hands. I just think with dough, those are your best instruments to feel things, to smell things. It's a very sensory-driven activity. So now I think I've got it all in there. I'm going to take a knife, and I want to trim off all the excess off the top here. We're just going to trim that off here. Go make this into my ball. I'm going to go ahead and just press it around the edge here. It's going to take a second to work it, and that's okay. Moving quickly, but not hastily. You don't want to rush yourself and make a mistake. There we go. All right. That's starting to feel good. If you feel like it's got like an air pocket, you can just kind of pop that out, and that should help deal with it. Now, one thing you want to make sure of is that you're gonna want this to dry a little bit so that it becomes a bit of a shell. And it's important, I think, to make sure that it doesn't slouch when that process is happening. So make sure while it's not up over that lip that you've got just a little bit of an edge. And if you feel it's a little thin in places, this is now the time to quickly try to add a little bit of depth anywhere you think you might need it. We're good to go. We'll set that aside. One thing we want to quickly do is make both of our pie lids. So take the other piece of dough, cut off the same amount that you wanted to reserve earlier. Make sure the surface is good. We're going to roll this out. Just like that. Go. Alright, perfect. Now, we're doing this before we do our meat filling because I mentioned that drying step where it just helps the crust become a little bit more solid. You can do the pie filling before, of course. That would be fine. And just put it in the fridge and let it be chilling while we get this whole process done. So now I feel I've got some good lids. I'm going to take one of my ramekins. I'm going to turn it over. Oh, sorry about that. Turn it over and cut a lid out. Oops. There we go. And this we'll set aside. I want to quickly, I think it's easier while it is wet to punch this hole in, but you want to go ahead and punch that hole in and then do that again. So we finished doing our regular AP flour shells, and I put both lids on a piece of parchment paper to dry. I prefer keeping them on there because it keeps one side a little bit damp, so when you work them together it's going to be a little bit easier. I've made my lard and water combination for the gluten-free flour. We've got that worked out on our surface. One thing we did make sure to do was we wiped our surface down to get all the other flour off there and dusted it with a different flour. I differentiated them in different containers here just to make that easier if you are working with multiple groups of people that have different dietary needs. That could probably be a helpful tip to make it easier. Separate your gluten plates from your non-gluten plates or something like that. So we're just working this one the same way we did the other one, hoping to get the same results out of it that I got out of the other set of flour. I will say, just from observation, it has a different smell to it than wheat flour does, and that's okay. That's okay. But you want to get used to whatever product you're working with. If you regularly use gluten-free product, smell it. Make sure it smells the same every time, that you're always feeling really confident with that smell. There we go. We're just going to cut off enough dough here for 2 lids. Here, so let's try and roll this all out now and see how it goes. Now this is looking much more like kind of a pie crust would. When I'm getting this kind of granulation around the edges, this is going to be interesting. Looks almost like a pesto dough. Interesting. It's going to bring a fun set of flavors to this process. All right. So we're rolling it out nice and uniform. Make sure the whole thing looks right. I'm rolling out a bit more than I normally would because I don't know how it's going to stretch and move around in the tin, and I don't want to have too much tearing, but we've got some tricks if we get a little bit of that. So, trick number 1, to ease in getting this off our surface nice and uniform, because I don't know how it's going to stretch again, although it looks to move pretty uniformly. I like that. All right. Get our dish ready that we're using. Now, a mince pie tin mold, if you have one, is probably going to be a lot easier to work with than kind of drafting whatever ramekins are in your kitchen. Now, I'm finding that this kind of folds apart a little bit on me. It's falling a little bit. So what we're going to do is allow these folds to kind of happen, but then we're going to pack this kind of in here, more like a rough pastry where we're not rolling it, but we're packing it in. All right, so we're going to move on the fly. We're going to be okay with this. Okay. Besides that, it's working fairly well, I think. There we go. All right, so we finished making our shells. We've got both kinds here right now. We've got the ones made with the regular AP flour and the ones made with the gluten-free AP. After working with this, one observation I would make if you were going to be doing this regularly is either add maybe a half tablespoon more water when working with the lard water mixture to make sure not so much water is lost in transference when making this. Maybe a little bit more moisture might make the dough a bit more workable. But if, like pasta dough or something like that, it just kind of cracks when you're putting it into the vessel, I found that getting my finger wet and then running it around the edges inside of the vessel, inside of the ramekin, helps smooth those out and give me the look I was looking for with my shell. And we'll see how that plays out. When I did do that, I was careful to, at the end, before it started drying, work it a little bit away from the lip right here. The reason that's going to be important, you want to do that on both kinds of flour, is that when we go to secure a lid, it's not going to be, this edge is not going to be stuck, and we're not going to have any tearing or any issues with our shell. So that is an important step to remember to do. If it isn't pushing away just easily with your finger, go ahead and use the tip of a paring knife or a spatula. Alright, so it's been a couple hours and our shells are set and ready to get stuffed with our filling. What we have here is in the ramekin still the gluten-free crust. I didn't have the confidence to pull it out of here and see if it formed into a shell like our other crust does. Traditionally you would leave these to dry for more than a day even until they had a good structure to them, but we're just definitely not going to be doing that. Now this is why you wanted to check the uniformity earlier, is also to make sure that there's no real thin points that you're worried about it breaking through. Now I've gone ahead and prepared a ham, bacon, and onion mixture. I put 1 egg in there for binder. I'm going to go ahead and put that here inside. I also added a little bit of extra fat in here because I cooked the bacon and onions together for, I don't know, probably about 5 minutes. Not really long, definitely not as long as you'd be cooking them if you were using them for an omelet or anything like that. But what I wanted to do was kind of marry those flavors together, and I then needed to reintroduce some of the fat so that this was all going to bind together nicely. Now as far as how far to fill them, I only want to go about 3/4 full. That's going to be about a cup each. So the amount of parts that went into this, let's see, we got about 1/4 of an onion, 8 pieces of bacon, and at this time of year, because I'm baking kind of in the winter time, you get a lot of ham on sale, and so I went ahead and took one of those spiral cut hams and used it for this because it was convenient. Now if you have any left that you aren't able to fit in reasonably because you don't want to overstuff these, that's okay. You can put this back in the fridge and use it tomorrow morning for an omelet, and that'll be super lovely. There you go. Now I'm finding that these blue ramekins are a little bit taller, so we might be putting just a little bit more than a cup into them. There we go. So let's get all these together. There we go. Using a spoon to gently pack. I don't want to pack too hard. I don't want to punch the side of any of this pastry that we have here. There we go. I should heed my own advice and not overfill here. There we go. Everything's looking really great. So we'll put that over to the side. Remember which tops are which. Our gluten-free ones here. So to get these to attach, I've got a bowl of warm water here. You're going to use your finger and just paint around the edge with your finger till you feel it's got a little bit. I wait till there's just a little bit of like flour starting to really move around. And I'm going to put that right on top here. Remember earlier that we found that this dough kind of has a penchant to want to break and be brittle a little bit. So I'm going to use a little bit extra water here, and I'm going to pinch these two together a little bit, but not too hard. We're going to come back later and go back at these and crimp them really well. But right now I just want to get it kind of solidified. I'm going to let that water work a little bit in there as well, because what I don't want to have happen is have this all just break apart on me and have all this work be for naught. I mean, it all still tastes good, but really, we're doing all this effort for these beautiful pies because they're going to look great on our plate with dinner, or if we're serving them to friends during, well, I guess whichever country you're in, you could say it's a football match, right? That's probably good, yeah. So to get them all to go together, I'm going to reach in the drawer, just pull out a fork and get it wet. And I'm just going to gently press all around the edge here with a fork. Now, I still seem to have some unavoidable cracking, but that will just be the way life goes. So there we go. There we go. So once I got that in, remember earlier I talked about making sure to push these edges in so they don't get stuck to the sides of the dish. We're going to just do that one last time. At this point, just be content with any slight crumbling we have at the top. And you'll see that that one's good. I'll set this one aside and do this in a second so I can show you one of these flour ones that I did. And as you can see, these tolerate being a freestanding pie a lot more. Or maybe that should have just worked with it a bit more. And to get that out of the ramekin that I had it in, I used my red spatula. You could have any color spatula, but mine happens to be red. And I used my red spatula to kind of work it out of there. If I felt in any way that it was going to stick or tear, abandon the idea, keep it in the ramekin and bake it in there. You can always try taking the shell out of the ramekin halfway through baking, and we might try that with one of these gluten-free pies. So anyway, I've kind of gotten that all ready and wet again, and you'll see that with these Scotch pies, or this style of pie that I'm doing, because it's based off Scotch pies, the lid needs to sit in there and make a brim around that, because there is going to be some bubbling that is going to occur. And you want to contain that bubbling, because that's going to bring a lot of our flavor back in there. So we don't want that to go anywhere. There we go. There we go. So we're just going to work this all together. I'm going to get these in, and I'll show you them before I put everything into the oven. Alright, the moment is here. We have let both of our sets of pies chill. And now we are ready to give them a little brush and send them on their way. Now you'll see that this one came out all right. This one's a little ugly, but I think that the wash will make that all okay. So we're not using a milk wash, which would be traditional, because we're doing this one both gluten-free and dairy-free. So we'll just do an egg wash. Really the only difference you're going to get there, besides of course, you know, the milky flavor and the kind of the eggy flavor there, the different flavor profiles, is what it does to the crust is the egg will make your finish shinier, and the milk will give it a duller finish. Milk is traditional though, which is why we've got a little bit right here for our freestanding pies. Now, if you don't want to do the freestanding, like I said earlier, you can leave them in the ramekins and pull them out halfway. You just want to make sure that they definitely solidify and don't collapse. I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure how these are going to turn out and hold up, but it's half the adventure, right? Okay. So we've got those two right there, and I'm going to add just a little bit of milk to that. There we go. Make that more of a milky egg wash. I think that's going to be good. All right. Let's spread these out a little bit more. There we go. Now we have it on some non-stick paper here. Whatever you're doing baking wise, I can't stress enough how much success using parchment paper under your cookies or underneath your pies like this, or under your pizzas or your breads, can just give you a whole lot of success. It just prevents things from sticking. If you're using old baking pans, which you're either your favorite because of the thickness, or they're the only ones you have, and they're a little bit maybe past looking their best, the parchment paper will also prevent any of that ancient flavoring from getting imparted to whatever you're baking. There you go. So we'll just finish dusting these up here with, well, not dusting, but soaking these down with the wash. And then I've had an oven here behind me preheating for about an hour. I always like to preheat my oven a bit longer. I find it gives me more success in my baking. So there we go. Everything's ready. Let's not mess with it anymore. I'm going to throw it in the oven here for 45 minutes. And we'll see you at the end of that. All right, the moment is here. We are going to bring our pies over, and now that we pulled them out of the oven, 40 minutes was perfect for these. Now for the ramekins, again, the pies out of there, that can be a little bit harder. So you want to go ahead and maybe use a hot pad or an oven mitt to hold these while you turn them over onto there. There we are. So here we go. We have 2 gluten-free meat pies and 2 with gluten, as it were, meat pies. So we're going to let these go ahead and cool for about 20 minutes or so, and then we're going to cut into them and see how they turned out. All right, the moment of truth is here. Let's go ahead and cut into one of each of these. Ooh. Seems like we got a good crunch on that. There you go. We got those right there. Quickly slip in here and take a bite. That'll do. That will do. All right. Let's try our gluten-free. That's looking right. For any kids watching at home, definitely don't use a knife like I do. But there you go. Let's go ahead and take a look at that now. All right, we got flakiness. We got rigidity. All right. You can see we have a clear bottom. It's not really a soggy bottom either. Look at that. So there we go on that. Let's take a look at this one a little closer. Again, good rigidity, clear definition on the bottom. Maybe a little soggy. We'll maybe lower the moisture a little bit, but it's actually holding up. Yeah, that's hard. That's good. So there you have it. 2 beautiful sets of pies. Well, thank you for coming and cooking with us today in our kitchen. Again, these were our meat pies made with the gluten-free flour and the normal AP flour. We did a ham pie. I did end up trying some of the gluten-free. It was really good. Had a good crunch on the edge, which I really enjoyed. If you'd like to try another filling or you have any questions, just let me know.